Thank you very much. Hello, my name is Johannes. I have a microphone, but that's mainly for the recording. Hope my voice is loud enough also for the seats at the back. I'll be talking about the book Post-Automobility Futures, which I read and liked a lot, and give my personal some summary and also some personal reflection on it. So interestingly, the book is actually not so much about the car and not even about futuristic cars, electric cars or connected cars, which one would assume given the title. But it's actually much more, and we just heard it, it's about lifestyle, and that already goes into the right direction what the book is about. It's much more about the world that we live in, about our public spaces and how we organize them, and it's certainly about speed and violence also, and how these are intertwined with the topic of mobility and transport. Also, the book is about a world, quote, in which a dangerous human-machine cyborg entity has appropriated space. And you see that there's a lot of heavy concepts in the book. And in order to understand that this is not about an Austrian time-traveling robot, it's quite helpful if you have read some SDS books. And this links to the fact that it's definitely not a beginner's book or a book for someone who has not read about at least some theories of social science, science and technology studies. That's quite helpful to understand the book and to understand what the arguments are about, because it's a very exhaustive book about the topic of mobility, transport, automobility, as they call it. So it's way beyond the car and much more about how we organize the world. Speaking of literature, there's several conceptions of how automobility is looked at. Dromocracy, nomos, actor network, dispositif, imaginary or dreamscape, spectacle. These are just concepts used to look from different angles at this topic of automobility. They also claim that automobility is an ill-named term to describe, especially the automobile, since it directs so much attraction to the car itself, but that is just one element in this whole automobility discourse that is intertwined into our economy, our life, our public spaces, and so forth. So, and as the title of this slide suggests, the book is called Post-Automobility, but much of this book is actually about automobility and reflects on this nomos, how they, for example, call it. So it's a very encompassing thing, automobility, and what distincts this book from other studies in this field, and so they draw on recent contributions in the field of automobility studies, the mobility turn, what it is called, and what they criticized is that many of the famous contributions, for example, Uri and Scheller, which are stars in this field, that they conceptualize automobility as a system, which was a huge turn in the way of looking at mobility, but yet they criticized that this is still based on a dichotomy between the material and the social dimension, and also that this does only partly account for the scope of automobility. As I said, it's way beyond the car. This is what Uri and Scheller also recognized, but it doesn't go far enough for the authors. So another conceptions they drawn from Jessenhoff and Kim is the concept of dreamscape, which is related to the concept of socio-technical imaginaries. As said, helpful if you read some books on SDS before. But basically, to sum it up, it's this is related to the fact that automobility is everywhere. So it spans across different fields of our life, that it's part of our life world and our world as we know it. So, quote, Dromocracy is wherein we dwell in everyday life or shared ordinary experience of life world. And it's also, and I think that's a quite important notion, it's a world that is constantly reproduced. So we're constantly, all of us, reproducing this order of automobility and how it's organized within our society and our life worlds. And one of the major arguments in this book is that is the concept of dromocracy, which is a bringing together of the terms speed and power, which are constitutive for automobility, according to the authors. So this starts by placing that technology enables humans to have the power to be of pace with human speed, stemming from Donna Haraway, who developed the cyborg theory, which I referred in the very beginning. But that is also violent. So automobility is a democratic order held together by speed, power, and violence. So we see the intermingleness of these three concepts. That's quite common and spans across the whole book. And as I said before, it's all over the place. So it's the expansion of Dromos speed across and through the globe. It's the violence of speed, which is everywhere in many parts of our life and life worlds. And looking at power and violence, they explore that there's certain elements quite interesting related to power and violence. So on the one hand, that automobility is quite an exceptional case in many ways. That this type of power and violence is quite unique, and that is normalized in many practices, which means that they claim that there is no other area where such a violent attrition of human life is considered normal and acceptable, as we see it with automobility, with deaths and injuries taking place, which is considered, taken into statistics, made public, but yet to a certain extent it's a very accepted fact, which the authors claim. Also, this violence is in many ways, and actually in almost all cases, attributed to the individuals. So it's always the individual driver, 79% is the number I remembered, that is claimed for the accident, not the way how mobility is organized, the cars, the external forces, and so forth. And to a certain extent, the traces of violence are also removed and cleared. So automobility has to some extent become unremarkable. So this violence at certain times disappears and is being made non-visible. Obviously, they also speak in their book about future automobilities. One central element in that is that there is a lot of manifestations of automobility, which also goes into the future through public investments and infrastructure building, something that we now currently see with electric mobility and the docking and loading stations, for example. Automobility obviously also is a driver for change, and in that regard we often hear how the technological solutions, electric cars, are to mitigate these impacts, but the authors Robert and Richard claim that we can expect autonomous connected electric vehicles to result in even more automobility, so that they do not solve many of the problems. And I just gave two examples: the increasing size of the cars that we see in our cities, which obviously also are a risk factor, but also demand more and more energy. The massive amount of space that we need for the infrastructures. These are just some examples that still exist with these new technologically enhanced cars. And still, while these are electric, they are still in hunger for energy. So this brings me already to the conclusion, not to take too much time from the discussion. So what they say is that the success of automobility, since it's also a political thing, obviously, that it has convinced us, so to say, that there are no alternatives, and that it is driven by technological advances, and that that those were not the outcomes of political strategies and decisions, but obviously the authors claim that they are, that is it exactly is. So it's very much linked to political decisions, our current automobility system, to use this word. So what they, in the very end of the book, suggest is to encounter this automobility and what they call it deactivate the dispositif, for example, which means to foster awareness on the one hand for power and inequalities of automobility, and also to enable people to raise awareness and to develop other forms of mobility. Bottom-up initiatives like mobility commons and the like are named in this book. So moving towards a post-automobility futures will require the deconstruction and collapse of the automobility imaginary. Which brings me to the last slide. So in light of current developments, the climate crisis, but also protest movements that we see in Austria, here an example from the Viennese Stadtstraße, it's a very timely contribution grounded in philosophy, science and technology studies, and ultimately deliberative democracy, as it also brings perspective about how to do things different. Thank you very much.